We all have tastes, right? I mean, of course we do. No matter what it is, we all have certain preferences for all different kinds of things. For example, you might like sweet foods, maybe you might like salty foods, maybe you like spicy foods. That doesn't mean you only eat sweet, salty, or spicy foods respectively, but you do have a preference. And I think we all like to think we know what our own preferences are. Going back to the food example, I know that I like foods that taste like your mom, and foods that are salty. I eat a lot of salty foods, and even though I eat some sweets here and there, I generally prefer the savory options. I'll even eat salt, like just by itself. I'm going to die before I'm 30. Point is, I'm well aware of what my own tastes are, which is why it's sometimes surprising when we either dislike things that seem like they would be right in line with our own preferences, or, more pertaining to the video, it's surprising when we like something that we feel like we shouldn't due to our own preferences. In 2005, Russian security forces raided an Islamist safe house in Dagestan and killed all 5 of the rebel group members inside. More relevantly to the video, however, Shadow of the Colossus was also released. Now I'm going to be straight with you. I was literally 1 year old at the time and my young, dumb baby ass was too stupid to buy a PlayStation 2. So I never played the original glorious 20 FPS gunk that all you boomers got to experience. I also never got to play the PlayStation 3 remaster either. Not sure why, I just never really got around to playing it. So my experience with the game is almost entirely in the scope of the Blue Point remake for the PS4, released in 2018. So keep that in mind when I talk about the game, although from what I've seen of the older editions it doesn't look like they changed very much. I heard a couple people complain about Wonder's new face, and I'm gonna be real, I have to agree, he kinda looks like he's holding in a fart in the remake, but other than that, I'm inclined to say I didn't miss much. Also, I don't own a capture card, and there's this annoying remote play message that I have to deal with. It's an inconvenience for you, the viewer, and me, the creator. I can't completely mitigate this annoyance, so I'll do what I can. It's better. So what was the point of that intro about tastes? Well, I generally have a pretty consistent taste when it comes to video games. I'm all about that gameplay. I don't really care about graphics, I hate when games have lots of cinematics, and I only care about the story if the game wants me to. For me, gameplay is king. For example, I'm not a fan of Naughty Dog games. I think they're overall quality products, and I get why people like them. I also think they'd be better as movies or TV shows, and they are. I feel the same way about the new God of War games. Again, they're overall good games, I just hate that the best parts of the game, for most, are the parts you're not playing. Any game where I'm just playing to make it to the next cinematic is a game I can't really give too high of praise. Although I think Ragnarok coming out with free, actually substantial DLC is fucking awesome. You don't see that much anymore. But my point still stands. It's why I love From Software games. They have barely any cutscenes to begin with, and all the cutscenes they do have are optional, skippable. FromSoft is a studio that puts gameplay first, and it's why I consider their games to be some of the greatest games of all time. Which is why I surprised myself by absolutely loving Shadow of the Colossus. But not at first. When I first beat the game, I actually had a lot of mixed feelings about it, and in fact, in terms of story, I kinda hated it. Shadow of the Colossus has a story largely shrouded in mystery. You're kind of just thrown into the world without context, like a baby left in the woods, or like Final Fantasy players in a conversation with the opposite sex. The world is very visually striking though. I would come to learn after playing the game that there had long been a dedicated community online that had been digging into the lore and history of the game's world, and it's easy to see why. The architecture and the general visuals of the environment is just screaming of the deep and rich past. The only other games with this kind of environmental intrigue are made by From Software. The premise is, from what I can gather, that the realm you are in is forbidden to mankind, or possibly even life in general. Normally, I'd have a problem with a game having a completely empty, open world, but in Shadow of the Colossus, it just works so damn well. There's something about the dead silence other than the wind, the occasional bird, and the sounds of your own actions that really makes you feel like you aren't supposed to be there. And it helps that, at least in the remake, and from what I have heard in the original, the world is so fucking gorgeous. Words really don't do justice to the serene beauty of the world of this game. This is undoubtedly one of the most visually appealing games I've ever played, and I haven't even talked about the Colossi yet. So, the basic premise is that the main character, Wonder, has brought a girl to the Forbidden Lands to restore her soul to life. We don't know what their relationship is, why exactly she was sacrificed, or really any details of the world outside. Wonder negotiates with a disembodied voice that calls itself Dorman. It's unclear exactly what Dorman is, but it tells Wonder that it can in fact restore the girl's soul, provided Wonder uses his divine blade to slay the 16 Colossi located throughout the Forbidden Lands. And this is the most unique part of Shadow of the Colossus for me. The game is just 16 boss fights. The only living things in the Forbidden Lands are you and the Colossi, and a bunch of salamanders for some reason. This is such a unique concept for a game. You journey out from the temple at the center of the map using the light from your sword and your horse, Aggro, to reach the Colossi. You take them down and are teleported back to the temple after each fight. And the Colossi themselves certainly don't disappoint. The fights aren't necessarily difficult mechanically, but they more than make up for that depth with spectacle. The game designed an entire climbing system for the player to take down the Colossi. In most games, oversized bosses are nothing but a nightmare for your camera. Granted, the camera in this game kinda sucks in general, but at least it's not because the bosses are huge. Each Colossi is a puzzle you have to solve, so in addition to looking awesome and just being colossal Colossi, they do have some nice curveballs to throw at the player. My personal favorite Colossus is Pelagia, the 12th in the game. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I think the area and the lead up to it with the waterfall is beautiful, and I think it has one of the more unique puzzle mechanics in the game. You have to work your way onto its head, then hit the glowing rocks to kind of steer the Colossus towards the intact platforms in the lake. You then have to bait it to jump onto those platforms to expose its gut where the weak point is located. I also like that in New Game it usually takes 2 mounts to actually fell the Colossus. And when you finally drain that bar to 0, the end of battle music really makes you feel it. It captures that you're watching something truly remarkable die, and also sounds weirdly depressing and melancholic, as if the game is acknowledging that you're destroying something truly unique, something that you were never even meant to see. So, obviously, I adore this game. That said, I also understand that me liking something doesn't make it better. Not to say Shadow of the Colossus isn't good, because it absolutely is good. I think it's really good. One of the best games ever made? I'm not sure I would go that far, and this is where the blemishes of the game come into play. For one thing, the restrictions of the boss rush style for the time it was made means the game is pretty short. I remember the first time I ever played, I beat the game in less than 3.5 hours, and in getting footage for this video, I beat it in 2 hours, while I was goofing off watching Jinxie compilations with my friends. And that was with me watching basically all the cutscenes because, again, I needed footage for this video. Also, for the game being so short, there are a lot of cutscenes. There are almost 40 minutes of cutscenes if you include the prologue. Now, these cutscenes are good looking and show off the real biggest feature of the game, the best cloth physics in the industry, but it's still a sizable chunk of an already short game. And even the parts of the game you play are mostly riding aggro around. The fights with the Colossi aren't super long unless you're an idiot, so most of the game is either a cutscene or riding your horse, or sniping some salamanders to get more grip and praying at the altars to restore vitality. I actually think this is really cool, and I actually think it's a really nice extra way to give yourself an edge, but you get my point. It also doesn't help that most of the best Colossi are towards the beginning of the game. Most of the Colossi are generally pretty fun to fight, though I think they get progressively less so throughout the game. The last 2 in particular aren't my favorite, which is a shame because Malice, the final boss, looks so damn cool. He's essentially just a building, and a big part of his fight is actually climbing him. It's kinda cool, but if you fall off at any point, you gotta do it all over again. And I find that the camera really fucks with you in this fight too. He also shakes a bit too much, making it really annoying on new game. The last half hour of the game was why I initially thought less of it personally. The story ends with Dorman coming back, then getting sealed away again, like right away. The girl comes back to life, so Dorman did at least keep his promise, and Wonder is reverted to an infant, presumably because Dorman borrowed his body and decided to spare him from sealing in some capacity. At first, I hated the ending because I felt like I had been told a pointless story. There really aren't any consequences for Wonder's actions, at least that's how I felt. He's still alive, he just got a few more years to his lifespan, boo-hoo. The girl he wanted to save is alive. Even Aggro, who was thought dead after falling into a canyon just before fighting Malice, is somehow still alive, with only a slight limp to show for it. The outside world doesn't suffer either because Dorman was sealed back away somehow. The chief dude just throws Wonder's sword into a pool of water, and that somehow did the trick. It all just seemed so unfocused and random, like the writers didn't know how to end the game, so they just pulled something out of their ass. The ending music is great, though. Honestly, this soundtrack is to die for, one of gaming's best. Those were my initial reactions upon finishing the game. Then I replayed it again, and again, and again. And I slowly started to realize that I love this game. My taste in video games isn't complex, I like games that are gameplay first. I like games that take advantage of the fact that they are indeed video games. Dark Souls, BioShock, Armored Core, all games in my top 10. All games that put the gameplay first and used their gameplay to tell interesting stories, albeit with mixed results. Shadow of the Colossus is a game that I shouldn't like. It has all of the hallmarks of the games that have disappointed me. It has tons of cinematics, the gameplay is uninteresting, most of the gameplay is spent riding through a completely empty open world, the entire focus is on spectacle. This should be the antithesis of my favorite games, but no matter how much I try to rationalize why I shouldn't like it, I do. Much like Sword Art Online, don't judge me. I also began to love the story over time. The actions of our protagonists do have consequences, we just don't see them. The girl, along with Aggro and Baby Wonder, is trapped in the Forbidden Lands now. No one can enter, no one can leave, so in a way that she probably doesn't even understand, she's paying for Wonder's sins. Who knows if Wonder even still remembers who she is, or what he did to bring her back to life. It's ultimately still my favorite kind of ending, a bittersweet one. It just so happens that this ending is a bit more sweet than bitter, but ultimately I'm okay with that. The chief throwing the sword into the pool to reseal Dorman makes no sense. Wonder being reverted to a baby happens without explanation or reason. Aggro being alive makes zero sense. He fell harder than Amelia Earhart. I should be bothered by all these random details, these plot holes really, because that's what they are. But for some reason with this game, I just don't give a shit. I know it has tons of flaws. I know that if I really wanted to, I could pick this game to pieces because that's what I did when I finished it. But I don't really care. Even if it's not one of the greatest games ever made, I can't deny that it is one of my favorites. I went into making this video mainly to do two things. One was obviously to talk about Shadow of the Colossus, a game I'm really passionate about. But I also wanted to have this as a backdrop to what is kind of another point. Like whatever you want. It sounds obvious, but it's more of a struggle than you might imagine. I've had many friends play a video game, have an absolute blast with it, and then claim to hate it shortly after because the general opinion of the internet wasn't positive. It's sad and kind of spineless, but people will sometimes change their opinion to suit what's popular, especially on the internet. More to my point, though, you also shouldn't stop yourself from liking things just because they aren't your usual taste, or just because you feel like you shouldn't like it. I've been guilty of that before, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. No one can control what they like and dislike, so why bother pretending to hate something you actually enjoy? There's nothing wrong with pointing out all the flaws in something and liking it regardless, just like there's nothing wrong with praising something and at the end still not liking it. Subjectivity may be random and unpredictable and irrational sometimes, but it's what makes us human. And there's nothing better than being able to just purely enjoy something despite it all. I know that Shadow of the Colossus is a bit of a mess. I know the gameplay is about as interesting as cornflakes and deep as a kiddie pool. I know that the last two Colossi kinda suck ass. I know that the camera in this game is terrible. And I also know that I love this game. I know that this is a game I will keep coming back to for the rest of my life. I know that I still think about the story. I constantly relive my favorite fights and spectacles. I always stop to admire the world, and I most definitely queue up the soundtrack on Spotify on a regular basis. Shadow of the Colossus is really good, but to me, it's so much more.